My name is Margaret Chen, and I'm 72 years old. I've lived a full life, raised 3 children, buried a husband, and learned that sometimes the greatest acts of love require the hardest decisions. The story begins 5 years ago, when my son Daniel got married to a woman named Victoria. Daniel was my middle child, 43 years old, kind-hearted, perhaps a bit too trusting. He worked as an accountant and had waited a long time to find love. When he met Victoria at a charity fundraiser, he was smitten immediately. She was 38, blonde, beautiful, and had a way of lighting up a room. They dated for 18 months before he proposed. I had my reservations, not about Victoria exactly, but about how quickly she seemed to be planning their future together. Still, I kept quiet. A mother learns when to speak and when to simply watch. The wedding was lovely. Small ceremony, clothes, friends and family. Victoria wore ivory silk and carried white roses. Daniel couldn't stop smiling. I remember thinking that day that perhaps I'd been wrong to worry. What I didn't tell them, what I chose to keep to myself, was that the house Daniel was living in, the 3-bedroom Craftsman on Maple Street with the wide front porch and the oak tree in the yard, was still legally mine. Years earlier, when my husband Thomas passed away, he left me comfortable. The house on Maple Street had been an investment property, and when Daniel's first apartment lease ended, I offered it to him at a minimal rent. Over time, as he settled in, painted the walls, tended the garden, it became his home in every way that mattered. Except on paper, I never transferred the deed, not out of mistrust, but simply because it never seemed urgent. Daniel paid me a small, monthly amount that barely covered the property taxes, and we both seemed content with the arrangement. When Victoria moved in after the wedding, I said nothing. This was their fresh start, their new beginning. Why burden it with legal paperwork and complicated conversations? 3 months after the wedding, I noticed changes. Victoria stopped coming to Sunday dinners. Daniel made excuses. She was tired. She had plans with friends. She wasn't feeling well. Then Daniel himself started missing our weekly lunches. His calls became shorter, less frequent. My daughter Rachel noticed too. "Mom, something's off," she said one afternoon over coffee. "I stopped by their house last week, and Victoria barely let me in the door. Said they were redecorating and everything was a mess." I felt a cold worry settling in my chest, but I told myself to be patient. New marriages need space to find their rhythm. Then came the evening that changed everything. It was late October, nearly 6 months after the wedding. I was driving home from my book club when I passed by Maple Street. On impulse, I turned down the familiar road. Perhaps I'd stop in, say hello, see if they wanted to join me for dinner. As I approached the house, I saw Victoria's car in the driveway, and another car. Didn't recognize a silver BMW with dealer plates. The living room curtains were open. Through the window, I could see Victoria. She was laughing, her head thrown back, wearing a red dress I'd never seen before. And she wasn't alone. A man stood close to her, too close. His hand was on her waist. As I watched, frozen in my car at the curb, he leaned in and kissed her. Not a friendly kiss, not a mistake. Victoria kissed him back. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. I drove away quickly, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. Daniel was out of town that week for a work conference. I knew because he'd called to tell me, apologizing that he'd miss our lunch date. I drove home in a daze. That night, I barely slept. By morning, I'd made my decision. I would tell no one. Not Daniel, not Rachel, not my youngest son Peter. This knowledge was mine alone to carry, at least for now, because I needed to understand what was really happening in that house. And I needed to protect what was mine, not just the property, but my son's future. Over the following weeks, I watched carefully. I drove by the house at different times, always discreetly. I saw the silver BMW there 3 more times, always. When Daniel was away, I hired a private investigator, a retired police detective named Frank Morrison, who my late husband had known. I felt guilty about it, sneaky even, but I needed the truth. Frank's report came back within 2 weeks. The man's name was Richard Brennan. He was 45, divorced, wealthy from a tech startup he'd sold. He and Victoria had been seeing each other for 4 months, which meant the affair had started just 2 months after the wedding. The report included photographs. Victoria and Richard at restaurants, at his penthouse apartment, entering hotels. There was more. Frank had done a background check on Victoria. Her last name before marrying Daniel was Foster, but she'd changed it legally 3 years earlier. Before that, she'd been Victoria Hartwell, and she'd been married twice before, marriages that had each ended within 2 years, both times with the woman receiving substantial settlements. I sat at my kitchen table with that report for a long time, feeling something cold and hard settling inside me. My son had married a woman who saw him as a stepping stone. She'd rushed the wedding, moved into what she thought was his house, and immediately begun planning her next move. I could have confronted her. I could have told Daniel immediately, but I've lived long enough to know that sometimes the truth needs to arrive in its own time, in its own way. Instead, I waited, and I planned. 2 months later, around Christmas time, Victoria made her move. Daniel called me, his voice shaky. "Mom, can I come over? I need to talk to you." He arrived at my house looking devastated. We sat in my living room, the same room where I'd rocked him as a baby, where I'd helped him with homework, where I'd talked him through his first heartbreak in high school. "Victoria wants a divorce," he said, his voice breaking. "She says she made a mistake, that we rushed into things. She's been different lately, distant, cold. I thought maybe we just needed time, but..." He put his head in his hands. "She's hired a lawyer. She wants half of everything, including the house." "Mom, I don't understand. I thought we were happy." I held his hand, this grown man who was still my little boy. "Daniel, there's something I need to tell you." His eyes met mine, confused, red-rimmed from crying. "The house on Maple Street," I said gently. "It's still in my name. I never transferred the deed to you." He blinked. "What? The house is mine," I repeated. "Legally, it's my property. You've been living there with my permission, but Victoria has no claim to it whatsoever." I watched understanding slowly dawn on his face. Then confusion. Then something else, a terrible realization. "She doesn't know," he whispered. "She thinks it's mine. She thinks..." "Oh God, Mom, is that why she married me?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. "There's more you need to know," I said quietly. I handed him Frank Morrison's report. Daniel read in silence. I watched his face change: shock, disbelief, pain, and finally, anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but cold and quiet. "How long have you known?" he asked. "Since October." "I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I needed to be sure." He nodded slowly. "What do I do now?" "First, you let her think she's going to get what she wants. Don't tell her about the house yet. Let her lawyer draw up the papers. Then, when the time is right, the truth will come out." Daniel stayed with me that night, and several nights after. He moved through the next few weeks like a man in a dream, playing his part perfectly. He acted hurt, confused, but cooperative. He told Victoria he'd work with her lawyer to divide their assets fairly. Victoria, I heard, was magnanimous. "I just want what's fair," she told Daniel. "A clean break so we can both move on." The divorce proceedings began. Victoria's lawyer submitted documents claiming half the value of the house on Maple Street, half of Daniel's retirement accounts, alimony for 3 years. Then came the court date, January 15th. I remember it clearly, because it was exactly 1 year since Daniel and Victoria had gotten engaged. I attended the hearing. So did Victoria, dressed expensively, her lawyer beside her. Daniel sat across from them with his attorney, a sharp woman named Jennifer Park. When the judge asked about the property division, Jennifer stood up. "Your Honor, there's been a misunderstanding regarding the house on Maple Street. The property is not owned by my client. It belongs to his mother, Margaret Chen, and has never been transferred to him. I have the deed documentation here." The courtroom went very quiet. Victoria's face went pale, then red. "That's not possible," she said. "He told me it was his house." "I never said that," Daniel replied calmly. "You assumed. I lived there, so you thought I owned it." "I never lied to you." Her lawyer was flipping through papers frantically. The judge reviewed the deed documents Jennifer provided. The house is indeed owned by Mrs. Chen, the judge confirmed. It cannot be part of this marital property division. Mrs. Foster, do you have documentation of any other significant assets? Victoria's case crumbled from there. Daniel had been careful with their finances, everything was clearly separated. She contributed little financially to the marriage, having quit her job shortly after the wedding, claiming stress. In the end, she walked away with almost nothing. No house, minimal assets, no alimony since the marriage had lasted less than a year, and she'd been unfaithful. I remember watching her leave the courthouse that day. She looked smaller somehow, diminished. I felt no triumph, only a quiet satisfaction that my son had been protected. Daniel came to stay with me for several months after that. Slowly, gradually, he healed. We talked a lot during that time about love, about trust, about how sometimes the people who should protect us need protecting too. I should have seen it, he said one evening. The signs were all there. Love makes us blind sometimes, I told him. That's not a weakness. That's what makes us human. A year later, Daniel met someone new, a teacher named Sarah, warm and genuine, with laugh lines around her eyes and a rescue dog named Biscuit. They took their time. They're married now, just celebrated their second anniversary. I transferred the deed to the house on Maple Street to both of them as a wedding gift. This time, I knew it was right. As for Victoria, I heard she moved to another state. I hope she found whatever she was looking for, though I doubt she did. That kind of emptiness isn't filled by houses or money. People sometimes ask me if I feel guilty about not telling Daniel sooner, or about keeping the house in my name all those years. The truth is, I don't. Sometimes protection comes in unexpected forms, in a deed that was never transferred, in a mother's instinct that something wasn't right, in patience and careful watching. I'm 72 now, and I've learned that life rarely unfolds the way we expect. But I've also learned that love, real love, isn't about possession or what someone can give you. It's about protection, sacrifice, and knowing when to hold on and when to let go. The house still stands on Maple Street, with its wide front porch and oak tree. But now, it's filled with the right kind of love, the kind that builds rather than takes, that gives rather than demands. And that, I think, is the best revenge of all. Not hurting those who hurt us, but protecting those we love and letting time reveal the truth in its own perfect way. Sometimes, the greatest gift we can give isn't something grand or obvious. Sometimes, it's simply a deed kept in our name, a truth held at the right moment, and the quiet knowledge that we did what needed to be done. That's enough for me.